This week's episode features Tess Martin. She's a filmmaker, animator, teacher, and visual artist based in Rotterdam. We talked about a few of her recent films, how your childhood can affect the art you make as an adult, and the challenges and perks of being an independent artist.
Art, I want you. Art, you make it pretty hard not to. And my heart is trying hard here to follow you, but I can't always tell if I ought to.
Okay, Tess. So happy that your sister found me on the internet and said, you should meet my sister.
Yes, indeed.
How's it going today in Rotterdam, right?
Yeah, it's going well. It's been surprisingly good weather here. So, but of course, as is often the case, as soon as it gets really nice and sunny is exactly when I have to be in the studio animating inside a black tent. So I haven't actually been able to enjoy the weather. But who's complaining? Not me.
There will be other
yeah.
days, I'm sure. Yeah.
Hopefully, fingers crossed.
So I'm really interested. So I read your bio in preparing for this, and it says that you bring your perspective as someone who was raised between cultures to explore themes of belonging, identity, and connection. Can you talk about a little bit about growing up between cultures and how that's informed the art that you make now?
Yeah, sure. That's something that I only added to my bio like a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, something like that, when I realized how important it was actually to my work. So I'm what's called a TCK, a third culture kid. Those listening to this who know the term, hello, I am one of you. Um, it was a term invented, gosh, I don't remember when this lady wrote this book, like in the 70s or the 80s or something, but it's a term for children who grew up outside of the culture of their parents and also outside of the culture where they live. And so they identify with some kind of third culture. And of course, there's a lot of, a lot of immigrant experiences fall under that very broad category. I mean, there's a lot of people's experiences that might fall under that category. In my case, and in the case of, I guess, a subset of that broad category is kids who grew up moving around in different cultures, usually because of the job of one of their parents. So there's different there's different circles in this Venn diagram. The one that people usually think of immediately is military. Like, oh, were you military? No, not in my case. There's also a not non-problematic circle of missionary kids, which also grow up moving around, and then there's also business people. What's the word, like you know people who work for big companies like Shell and
Right, yeah.
these big multinational companies. And then the smallest of these circles is the academics, and that was my family. So my dad is a professor, and he got different like teaching contracts basically at different universities. Hmm, so we moved around a lot basically. I mean, and compared to other people, my experience was very narrow in that I only grew up on two continents. And they are both in the West. So from a global perspective, it's very narrow. I mean, I grew up in Europe and the US. So and then having said that, I don't actually remember any of my years in the US. So basically I grew up in Italy, Denmark, and the Netherlands. And then as an adult, I moved to the US. I moved to Seattle, where my sister, Beth, who contacted you, is still living, basically because I had to move to the US because I didn't have a visa to live in Europe anymore. And then I moved back to Europe after a long road involving studying a master's course and a different visa. So now I've been in the Netherlands this time around for about 11 years.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely see how that would be. I mean, that perspective would be obviously narrower than somebody who has had a more wide ranging, you know, uh, childhood or what have you. But at the same time, as opposed to somebody who, like, there's a lot of people around me who have lived on PEI and have not left. You know, that maybe they've
Prince Edward Island for those of my friends who I pointed to this
right.
podcast who are listening and do not
Thank
know
you.
what that stands for.
Yeah. So yeah, there's lots of people around here that have never left, and never gone anywhere, never lived anywhere else. Um, and
I mean, that's, you
so
know, that's most of the people in the world, to be fair. Like
true.
that's like most people. So
Uh, yeah, but for me, I did leave. I didn't leave for too long, but I always kept coming back. So for me, there's a lot of themes in my work about going back to where I belong and knowing where my roots are and that sort of thing. So yeah, so interesting that
mhm.
um, what we grow up with does come out later on.
Yeah, and you recently did move back, right?
I actually have been living on the island for quite a while now. I was gone in my 20s for a bit, but I'm in my 40s now, and I moved out to the east end of the island from the capital city of Charlottetown a few years ago. So
Ah, got it.
that was the
Got it.
last move. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I mean, that's also so interesting to me. And in a way that's like we're talking about it. I realized a few years ago that somehow most of my work is about um, trying to put my experience in a larger context or
Mhm.
trying to connect with either um, people in my immediate vicinity, like people in my family or like ancestors, like people within my kind of world, or
Mhm.
more broadly. So I think that is related to growing up constantly moving and constantly having to basically uh, put yourself in context, constantly
Yeah.
having to like figure things out.
Yeah.
Like,
Understand who you
okay,
are in a
what's
different situation. Yeah.
yeah, and understand, like, what's happening around you. Like,
Right.
okay, how do things work here? What's the and, like, kind of being forced to, without knowing how, figure out who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And, as a kid, you're not necessarily good at that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that's, like, a learned thing, and somehow this has stuck with me, this urge to constantly look outside myself,
Mm-hmm.
and I do think it's related, to that
Oh yeah.
experience.
100%. It's all related, I suppose, in some way. But what you're talking about right now reminds me of the one of the films that you shared with me, the Password 1976 Search for Life film.
Oh, it's just
Uh,
called 1976 Search for Life, sorry.
oh,
The
yeah.
password is just there for me to remember that this is the file that has the password
Shoot.
on it. I love it. Oh, how meta. Like, what if the title was actually Password 1976? Whoa, mind blow.
It
Like a
it
secret,
seemed like a
speakeasy kind of, oh, that's so
yeah,
interesting. Oh, how
uh,
funny. No, it's literally because I have so many videos that, like,
right.
I can't remember which ones are the secret ones, so I put the word password at the beginning. Ah,
Anyway, I really liked that, and I didn't read, like, I can't even remember if there was anything written about the film on the page. I just watched it, and as I was watching it, I'm like, I think this is like her dad. I think this is like like a journal from her dad, and I was going through it. I'm like this, and it just seemed like a really beautiful little like going home story of your family from probably before you were born. And
thank you. Yes.
And also the kind of the coinciding with the Mars landing around the same time was just really neat, and like this kind of like search for family and search for where it began or where your roots are, or and it
Mhm.
seemed like it was partly your grandmother, probably your dad's mom, maybe it was a search for her, like looking back at where she grew up or something like that. Anyway, I found that beautiful little film.
Thanks. Yeah, it's something that I, uh, finished a few years ago. Um, it's obviously not online yet as we're recording since we just had this conversation about the password, but it will be soon, but it's something that developed over a number of years before that, when I had been getting into, family history research, and I had discovered this travel journal that my dad had written, um, during their trip, when my eldest sister, Beth, again, who contacted you, was, like, 6 months old or whatever, or 8 months old, I guess. Yeah, 8 or 10 months old, something like
Mhm.
that, the summer of 1976, which happened to be the same summer as the NASA Viking mission to Mars, which is the first images that we have from the surface of Mars,
Right.
with, like, the orange earth and the rocks, and, uh that was mentioned by my dad in the journal. So I was kind of struck by this, almost, wormhole, kind of worm tunnel, situation of me reading this journal, looking back at this moment in my dad's life when it was kind of a important trip for him, and he was going indeed with his mother back to Scotland and with his wife and new baby. So, like, this kind of life-changing time of his life when he's a new father,
Mhm.
and also he's trying to reconnect with his ancestors and his past. Um, but then I was also struck by the slight disappointment in both journeys because the NASA mission, and as is said, and because I use a lot of archival audio and some archival footage in this film, the scientists are talking about how actually even though the mission was successful, as in the landers landed and they took samples and they took photographs, they didn't find any life. So they kind of stopped research on Mars for like 20 years. So there's this kind of bittersweet nature to the Viking missions. And similarly, I think, in the words of my father and kind of what they discuss, there's a little bit of, well, we did what we could, and we tried to reconnect, and, we tried to return these photographs to my aunts, but they weren't home, and that was it. So
Yeah.
this which I recognize that disappointment and frustration with this type of family history, research, and also just this type of trying to connect with your parents from a time, from before you were born, which is obviously impossible. I mean,
Yeah.
those people don't exist anymore. So I was struck by this idea of, like, we are trying
Mm.
despite the difficulties inherent in these journeys.
Yeah. There was a quote from that, I think from the archival, recordings that you had in that film, and it said, "As your perspective broadens, you learn more about what you left at home as well as what you went off to seek," which I found very cool because that's
Yeah, the great Carl
thank you.
Sagan. Yeah, indeed, and I mean, that's kind of him justifying the entire mission, like, why why
Yeah.
are we going to a seemingly dead planet? And in a way, that's what we do when we are looking back at the past and our ancestors, but also when
Mhm.
we're, trying to connect with the people around us, I think. You
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
learn more about yourself.
Mhm. Mhm. And I think just the act of travel, getting distance between your home um, and you, uh, it gives you a lot to think about in regards to what you want out of life and who you are, I think.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. Yeah, I think that's why a lot of people gravitate towards traveling, like even just short trips, because it kind of forces you to remember who you are, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You work in, different artistic mediums, from what I can tell, probably more than this too, film, animation, visual art, there's probably more in there. Do you think one of them influences another, or do you think it's all just kind of one big, like, creative drive? Like, do you think your approach to filmmaking is from, like, a visual artist perspective or vice versa, or
Um, Good question. I mean, I think that they definitely all influence each other, in terms of what came first. I do have a fine art background, so I studied fine art for my bachelor. So I was surrounded by people doing like performance art and like painting, neither of which um I related to at the time. Uh and it wasn't until I discovered experimental animation that which I discovered during my bachelor of fine art, that I really felt connected actually to, even
Mm,
though of course I'd always been doing art. I'd always been in art class. I'd always been doing like crappy paintings and, like I'd been searching, like art was
mhm,
always my thing, but I'd never I knew that I wasn't doing anything like
mm,
that really meant a lot to me. Like nothing was clicking. Like, and I didn't recognize it at the time. I just knew that this wasn't it,
mhm.
So I was, in fact, I started out on the painting course. I was doing like weird three-dimensional paintings with like bubble wrap and stuff. Um, and then I discovered experimental animation and it clicked and I basically, learned everything in the library because there was no animation, let alone film instruction, on my bachelor at this time. But it didn't matter. I was off and started making these weird films. So I do think about film and animation from a fine art, like, point of view.
Mm, mhm.
And I've realized that more and more, uh, over the years because when you are working in the experimental animation fields, um, you're always contending with the larger Venn diagrams. I'm using Venn diagrams a lot in this
Yeah.
conversation. The larger Venn diagram of animation that your little circle lies within. So you're
Mm.
you're constantly, having people come up to you and saying how much they love Disney, or Miyazaki for like the slightly more educated viewer, and neither of those have anything to do with what I do, and so I completely love and appreciate them on a number of levels, especially Miyazaki's work, but there's a lot of that. There's a lot of aspects to that I really don't relate to at all,
Mhm.
and and so that's why I'd say I've realized that I think of film from a fine art point of view because, um, because I know people who don't.
Yeah.
So I realized where we're different in that respect. It's like, "Oh, okay, I think about animation quite conceptually."
Mhm.
And I think about it much more as a form of personal expression. And of course, the other end of the spectrum also. Like there's artists like Oscar Fischinger, or Norman McLaren who were really like visual music and
Mm.
just like dots, direct on film anime, and like that's not me either. I mean, I've never done quite that level of, improvisational animation, like, that's also not
Mhm.
me. So I guess I'm kind of in the middle, but, like, yeah, now I also do installations that involve my videos, and I'm working on a film right now that is more narrative than my other films, so in that respect, it's a bit more like film.
Mm, mhm.
as opposed to experimental animation. So now I do like everything, and they indeed all influence each other. So sometimes I'll
Mhm.
first start thinking about a spatial experience, like an installation, and then that happened with 1976. Like I first was thinking about an installation that people would have to walk around that involved like the original Sky and Telescope magazines from 1976 that
Mm,
had published the photos that I bought on eBay,
mhm,
and also this like slideshow that I had made of from photos of the trip. All these things with a soundtrack that people
mhm.
listen to on headphones. In the end, that I didn't end up using any of that really. It was all a means to an end, and it evolved, and now the installation is this kind of artificial looking Mars set with, like, a specially constructed television cabinet. Um, so, but then that influenced the edit of the film.
Mhm.
So because I work on them kind of contemporaneously, they end up influencing each other.
Yeah, yeah. So, you said 1976 isn't out yet. Is that going to be, installed somewhere soon?
Not no, we don't have any plans for an upcoming installation. The last time it was installed was last September at a festival here in the Netherlands, where I also did kind of an altered version of it where I performed. Having
Mm,
just said that I went to art school with performance artists and I didn't relate to their work, I performed part of the voiceover that you
cool.
hear.
Mhm.
So it was this kind of half video, half performance. It was kind of cool.
Mm.
But the short film will be online, like, next summer, because next summer is gonna be the 50th anniversary
Oh, yeah.
of this summer in 1976. So we thought, why not?
Cool.
Traditionally with short film, you first let it go around festivals and then you put it online. I mean,
Yeah.
there's different, thoughts about this. People do it differently, but, that's how it ended up for this film, so
Mm. Um, Being an independent filmmaker seems to be a balance between the limitations of budgets, resources, etc., but also the freedom to make what you really wanna make without anybody, giving you any instruction. How do you navigate that, balance?
well, I feel like, it's impossible to talk about this without talking about the funding system
Mhm.
because, I'm lucky to live in a country where there is public arts funding at all. And I
Mhm.
say that as someone who moved here from Seattle, which by US American standards had some public arts funding. Um, of course, things are changing now, right, politically. So
Yeah.
everyone is, like, stressed about the arts funding being cut. But anyway, when when your income relies on the public arts funding, which mine does basically, uh, as low as it is, it's still from the public arts funding mostly. So, it's true you're not making client work, like, you're not making a
Mm.
commission film, which I also do sometimes, by the way. I also sometimes do, just client
Mm.
work, work for other people who are paying me to do, like, some kind of handmade animation for something
Right.
else. Like,
Yep.
that's great. If it's a good fit, I will totally be up for it. It's a nice way to meet new people and, like, whatever. But it's
Mhm.
it's rare because it's very expensive what I do.
Mhm.
Um, so most of my income comes from public arts funding where you're basically saying, "I wanna make my own thing. Please give me money to make my own thing."
Mhm.
And then they will say yes or no. And often at first it's no, so you have to reapply and you have to alter your application or you have to
Mhm.
develop it more so it's just a more convincing application, which of
Right.
course you're doing without any funding until you get the money. So in some ways, you're still beholden
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
someone. and it depends what type of money you need. If you just need a little bit of money, it's fine. But if you are making a really expensive project that you need a lot of money for, and you need to go to the Dutch Film Fund, for example, then they have a lot of like stages. Everything is split up into stages, like development,
Yeah.
production, and post-production. Each
Mhm.
stage has a ton of requirements. So if you're not careful, it completely kills the joy and any spontaneity because everything has to be like pre-decided to
Yeah.
convince them. So it's a balance and it's a dance, and I try to do it like, obviously well, so I get the money. But I try to maintain as much flexibility as possible. So I try to think of the grant applications positively as an opportunity to develop the project,
Mhm.
and then also give myself the license to not have to stick to everything I said in the application that I wrote like 2 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, you know, you change as a person and
Mhm.
you're making the film now, and that's just part of the artistic process. So I try not to stress about it too much, you know, once I've
Mhm.
gotten the money. There's plenty of opportunities for stress before you get the money. Um, so yeah, it's hard, basically.
Mm.
That's the short answer.
Yeah. Yeah, similar. I mean, Canada has very similar public arts funding, although I feel like after talking to a few people that have specifically musicians that have toured more in Europe, they talk more about lots more options for funding for not only artists but for venues and for promoters and for blah 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 blah,
Mhm,
all sorts of different parts of the organization. So or the industry. So I'm assuming
mhm.
it's similar in the film and animation world.
Yeah, I mean, it's all relative, right? So, yeah, for sure, compared to other places, it's traditionally been pretty good here, but
Mhm.
it's definitely been changing like the last 15 years. You know, like there used to be this public assistance for artists, like monthly money that you would get, like
Oh,
just because you're an artist. Like
amazing.
unemployment, except like, you know, you're an art and, you know, there was some strings attached to it. You had to, like, prove you're an artist by making sure you had, like, an exhibition once a year, and it wasn't a lot of money, but it was, like, just enough to pay super basic rent a month,
Yeah.
which is, like, great,
Yeah.
and they scrapped that right when I moved here. So that doesn't exist. So, you know, but like I said, it's all relative. It just depends where you're coming from.
Yeah, totally. I wanna chat about the new, film that is just starting its festival run, How Now House.
Mhm,
Uh, I love the quote near the top that says, "Time is counting change." And I probably like a lot of people who have lived in a place where a lot of different people have lived in, I often have thought about how many other people have sat here, what were they doing in this room, and in that room, and what does it mean to be now here in this space? Like that film really brought up a lot of questions and also made me like, yeah, I've thought about this stuff before. I'm wondering how you like, and by the way, that film definitely starts out like that first shot of the room that everything is centered in, um, looks like a painting. So I'm definitely had the thought that that is where maybe that came from, was that view of that window and that table
mm.
in that room for you. But I'd love to hear how you came up with the idea for that project.
Yeah, I mean, indeed, I think it's something that a lot of people relate to because the houses are like another time wormhole opportunity. What's the word I'm looking for? It's like it's not a wormhole, but like a time portal. It's like another
Like a
easy,
vortex or
yeah, like
something.
a time vortex where we immediately are easily able to kind of look around physically around us and imagine other people living in this old house. I mean,
Mhm.
assuming it's an older house. Um, so I think that's why this happens to a lot of people because it's just such an easy in. It's such an easy in.
Yeah. Yep.
And in my case, it became interesting because I had lived in this one four-bedroom shared house in the north of Rotterdam for 10 years with
Mhm.
my friends, with, like, a mostly rotating cast of housemates, but me and my one housemate were there the entire 10 years, and neither of us, like, planned to be in this one house that long. It was just kind of the first shared house that you move
Mhm.
into with your student friends. This was after my master's, so, we were all a bit older, but it was the same situation, and I was like, and again, as someone who grew up moving, this was
Mm.
notable, right? Like, oh my
Right.
gosh, 10 years, not only in one country, in one house, like,
Mhm.
my goodness, and of course, I started to, because it took quite a long time to develop this project, so I knew that maybe this era was about to come to an end, and so I think that's why I started thinking about it, and I started researching the history of the house and all the previous residents and the blueprints of the house, and so I could see how the house had changed over time, and I started to become fascinated by the history of this one house
Mhm.
specifically, and what does my tenure here mean in the context of all these people who've lived here,
Mhm.
and why is it that we get attached to the houses that we live in, but also why is it that we feel like our presence should have an effect? Like,
Right.
when we leave, we feel like someone should care, right? I
Yeah.
think that's where it ultimately comes down to is it's we are aware of our own mortality, and somehow we attach these feelings to the physical, place that we live in. That's why it's so interesting to think about all the previous people that you never knew
Mhm.
lived there
Yeah.
before you, because it's like, well, who does remember these people? Where did these people go? Did they leave a trace in the house that I can find?
Mhm.
So that's kind of where it started, and then there was all this research that went into it, and funding applications, and in the end, it became what you see. And I, of course, was also researching about time, and that became a big part of the project. Like, kind of towards the end of the project, I realized how important this scientific concept was of
Mm.
time, and thinking about the house as a potential, what did we say? Time vortex?
Yeah.
I've been saying time container because it feels, that's what it feels like to me. It's like a house just physically contains all the time, all the duration of time that other people have
Yeah.
lived there also. So then I read a ton of books, and the one that really stuck with me was Carlo Rovelli's book, The Order of Time, which is like,
Mm.
it's not a super recent book. It came out a few years ago, but it's a very popular book about time. He speaks in very common sense language about time, and so I contacted him and got his blessing to use some quotes from his book in the film. So, and then I wrote scripted dialogue for actors that was based on the real residents that I
Mm.
found.
Mhm.
And some invented people, because there's a period of time for which I don't know anything about the house because of privacy
Mm.
laws. So I
Mhm.
don't know who lived in the house after like 1965 until 2012 when we moved in. So there's this big empty spot that I kind of made up from educated guesses of like
Mhm.
mail that kept coming to the house, and kind of knowing the development of the city in those years.
Yep. Yep.
So it ended up being kind of an experimental documentary, because it's you hear these voices of these people, but they're actors. They're not like the real people, obviously, also
Mhm.
because some of them would have to be extremely,
Yeah.
healthy, long living people, for it to be the real residents.
Mhm.
So Yeah, and then this idea of playing cards started to become part of it. So it was all these influences kind of colliding, and I started to realize that what I do as an animator is also time manipulation, and the
Mhm.
frame by frame nature of most of what I do is a potential way to express what I'm feeling or to explore these themes in this film. So I started thinking about frame by frame photography and um, cards and the the sequential nature of playing
Mhm.
cards because when you're not playing a game, when it's just a stack, it's kind of like a stack of film frames. It's just a
Mhm.
sequential it's just, like, literally a stack of objects that are changing.
Mhm.
That's also what time is, right? Time is counting change. So, this idea of playing cards, came into it also, and I started shuffling the frames of the film as well as the cards. So it all
Cool.
came together and in the end we didn't get the as much money as we thought we would get, so which was actually probably a blessing. So there's one actor who plays all the characters, which is
Mm.
fine because actually you only see her silhouette anyway.
Yeah.
And I actually think it's better because at first I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna have to, like, cast this such a diverse array of,
Mm.
men, women, old, young, blah, blah, blah," and it's like, "No, we'll just have one actress and, like, dress her up in different clothes," and, it's actually much better because it's more about she's kind of the surrogate of me, and
Mm.
she's kind of inhabiting these different people. So, yeah. I hope people get to see it soon at a festival near you.
Is it gonna be shown at any Canadian festivals?
I hope so.
Mhm.
I don't think there's any Canadian ones that we know of yet. There is an installation version
Mm.
that will be shown here in Rotterdam at a special venue for the month of June. But obviously, you have to be here to see that.
Generally speaking, if somebody, let's say, hears this in Atlantic Canada and says, "I love this person's work. How can I see it and support them?" How would you answer that question?
Um, I would say, "Wow, that's amazing." Most of my work is online and viewable, so you just have to Google my name or go to my website, which is tessmartinart.com, and you'll find, it's everything except the last 2 films are online already, so you'll see the films themselves, and you'll see documentation of the installations, and, I'm always looking for places to show the installations. This is a practical difference between the
Mm.
more kind of visual art world versus the film world is, um, with short films, at least you can submit them to film festivals. It doesn't mean they're gonna get in, but at least you have
Yeah.
that option, whereas with installation art, you do really need to hustle, much more to, like, find, a curator who will, invite you to show your installation or a space or, like, whatever. Um, so if anyone is interested in, hosting an installation, that would also be cool.
Mm.
Um, I just realized, like, 6 months ago that Letterboxd?
No.
It's this, like, film, archive site where
Mm.
every film ever made is, like, listed, and then it's kind of a way for people to review the films they've watched. So
Okay.
they can have a list of, like, films I watched, kind of to brag, I
Mm.
guess, and then leave, reviews for all the films. But what I hadn't realized was that when your films show in festivals, basically they end up on this site because someone, either the programmers or the festival people, put it up.
Mm.
So, there's like there's like a profile of mine with lots of my films on it and some reviews, which I was just, like, flabbergasted. I had no idea these were sitting here. So you can always leave a great review of my work on Letterboxd.
Letterboxd.
That would be amazing.
Well, I'm definitely gonna check that out now. I did not know it existed. That's cool.
Well, I'm curious, I'm curious. Well, I guess I'm wondering because you're a creative person, but you do music, which is definitely something I don't do myself. Um, what do you think when you watch these kind of weird experimental short films? Like, is it something that you can relate to as a creative person, or is it like, okay, this is not my medium?
Probably a bit of both, but more like the first one. Um, because, uh because there were things in both of the films of yours that I watched that I was like, "Yes. Oh my goodness, yes, I totally relate to that," or "That's beautiful," and that is being said in such a lovely way, or those 2 things combined are making for a really interesting idea, and I recognize why somebody wanted to make a film about this, those kinds of things. So that's the kind of things that I was getting when I was watching your stuff, and especially, the How Now House film because I like to think about time.
Like, because music has such an interesting connection to time. I mean, not to say something completely basic, but,
Mhm,
I think that's something that our 2 mediums have in common, right? Is they're both
mhm,
time-based. So, like, we expect and hope people will listen or watch our stuff
mhm,
for the duration of it. Um yeah, and of course, music also deals with rhythm and repetition,
mhm.
which film can do also. Um,
And both
yeah.
mediums can get somebody feeling something that they haven't felt in decades or, which is kind of time travel or, remind somebody of a certain person or what have you, and they're
Mhm.
back in that place or,
Yeah.
um
I've always been like especially moved by people singing. It's also probably because it's something that I'm just really, horrible at, like, I'm completely tone deaf. But when I hear someone singing, it's immediately incredibly moving. It's like a shortcut to
Mm,
emotions, to, like, your heart,
mhm.
because you can just hear this person putting their heart out there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I wanna say thank you for being on, and this was a lot of fun, and it's great to meet you, and I hope that we keep in touch.
Yeah, let me know if you're ever on this side of the Atlantic Ocean. Cool. Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. This was fun.
Yeah, super fun. Thank you.
I wondered what would be the worth of my words in the world if I write them and then recite them, are they worth being heard? Just because I like them, does that mean that I should mic them and see what might unfurl? And I think of the significance of my opinions here. Is it significant to be giving them? Does anybody care? Just because I'm into this, does that mean that I should live like it? And really, do I dare? Art, art, I want you. Art, you make it pretty hard not to. And my heart is trying hard here to follow you, but I can't always tell if I ought to. So I pondered the point of my art in this life. If I make it, will someone take it and think that it's genuine? Would they be glad that I did, 'cause they got something good out of it? Would they leave me and be any more inspired? And I question the outcome of the